I think we've stumbled on something that probably wasn't in our script of questioning, but it's fascinating that it came out. And I'd like to take Kristine's question and tweak it a little bit and just say to you, so much time is spent on this conversation of kind of like faith versus science. And I think what you guys have just brought out in this conversation, it's not faith trumping science. It's almost a political worldview trumping faith and science in this question, right? So it's not like they're bowing to Jesus and you're bowing to Darwin. It's kind of like they're making Jesus bow to their worldview, and you know and I'll just share with you in this way. Of course, I'm sure we're all a part of a lot of different varying groups of faith groups and science groups. And I was in a group recently, and they asked this question based on somebody's article they wrote that was kind of coming from a liberal perspective. And the question was, would you be, if you sat with Jesus at a counter the day after the election, would you be able to justify your vote to Jesus? And I thought to myself, boy, if you're talking about one local American election with Jesus when you first encounter him at a counter, you are of all men most miserable. And you're assuming Jesus would want to talk about Trump versus Biden. And I think in the very question itself is a reductionism of who Jesus is and was about. And this idea that this must be at the forefront of all our being. And it seems to me we're not very different than that first century climate Jesus was born into, with the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and they're fighting over this. I mean, how often does Jesus focus on Caesar and rants against Caesar? And yet that's so. Is it just me, or did Kristine stumble on something here that is it's possibly it's above both faith and science, that these worldviews, the clash of worldviews has demanded really the subservience of how you think about the Bible and Christ and how you process the information in the lab. And that's for either one of you. I don't know.
Well, I'll start and then I'll let Sara, pipe in. But that's one of the reasons why I love Barth's theology, because in some sense, and why I wanted it to be at the center of the book, because I do think that fundamental to this is the issue of ideology, and that we are all, whether on the left or the right, we're all bound up in ideology, and we're all bound up in culture and language and paradigms and worldviews. And really for me, Bonhoeffer is one of the persons that I interact with quite often. I keep trying to help my students see that for Bonhoeffer, for Barth, there's a sense in which God breaks into every ideology. Barth would even say that Christians should become good atheists. We should all not believe in the idols that we construct, even in our churches and even in our attempts to be Christian. But how do we open ourselves up to receive who God is and receive the creation? That's where this notion of paradigm shifts, I think, is so important. That and Barth talks about this in his Dogmatics, where he's just saying we can never fully latch on the Christian faith into a particular scientific paradigm because it's always changing. But our faith needs to be open to receiving what science tells us about the created world. And it's a question of having, I think, that openness. What does that openness look like to be able to receive what science tells us about creation, about humanity, and so on, and not see that as a threat to the gospel, but recognize that as Christians, we're human beings living in this created world, and God has given us these capabilities to understand it through science.
Yeah, I think the only thing that I would add is that as a scientist who's also a Christian, it goes both ways. I need to be open. My faith needs to be open to what science teaches me. But I also need to experience my faith, or experience my science, do my science as a person of faith, so that, when I discover something new in the lab, I experience a real intimacy with God, because I know something about God's created world that no one else does until I tell them. And for me, doing science and uncovering the beauty of the natural world is worship.